Welcome to How to Rock the Stage Show, a show committed to equipping you to hone your media skills better to stand out from the crowd as a go-to expert in your field. Each week, Rich Bontrager interviews top leaders, influencers, authors, speakers, podcasters, and media professionals about how to leverage media best to help you shine brighter on camera and stage as a go-to expert. Now, here's your host, The Trigger, Rich Bontrager.
Welcome back to another edition of How to Rock the Stage. Great to have you with us. Wednesday night live, every Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We go live, and we're streaming on multiple platforms at one time. Part of expanding your reach, shining on camera and shining on stage to elevate you and your brand. You got to expand your empire. You got to push further and further out. So we are streaming on multiple platforms. And tomorrow, this will be rebroadcast, re-wrapped up, and put on the audio channels at 11 o'clock. We'll go live as an audio podcast. Some of the things we can help you with right here at Rock the Stage. Tonight, we are going to be talking about media, podcasting, audio. We're going to talk about audiobooks. We're going to get into some of the best ways that you can elevate you and your voice. Your voice is your brand. Your voice is your persona. And there's so much more. We're not going to ruin it all yet. We're going to get into it. David Wolf is the founder and CEO of Audivita Studios, a podcast and audio book production company. And David's going to be sharing his experience, his insights gained from years helping hundreds of companies, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and thought leaders launch their audio books and podcasts. And if I read his credits, we'd be here all night long. We'll do that during the show. So here comes David Wolf, everybody.
Good evening, Rich. David. How are you? Good to see you.
You should have seen him backstage, everybody. He was like, don't read the credits. Don't read the credits.
Yeah, it's a long laundry list. You know, I tell people that podcast with us, when you're introducing a guest, you shouldn't read the laundry list because a lot of times as a podcaster, right, people send you the bio and it's like there's a long list. In fact, I just committed that crime, didn't
I? But I should mention, it is an award-winning team you have. You have done an amazing job. Congratulations with what you're doing because it's not just podcasts. It's not just audiobooks. You're pushing out to a lot of great area for media.
Well, it's really cool that you mentioned the team thing because, you know, my job now as the CEO of this company to help it grow is I'm really the face of the brand. I'm the voice of the brand. Sometimes I call it the voice brand. And somehow, miraculously, after I started this company kind of doing everything myself to kind of get a feel for all the facets of what I would do. I was recording, editing, producing, and, selling. And as I started to bring people in, some gift from God or somewhere, I brought in this amazing leadership team. And then we have a couple dozen freelancers across the country. And it's all about them. This is a business that's really all about the experience we deliver, not only to each other internally, but then out to the folks that we support and getting their voice out in the world, whether it's a podcast or an audiobook. So.
Well, that's one of the things that as I do different shows with the National Speakers Association or Rock the Stage, one of the big questions I get is, do I have to do this alone? There's so much going on. And you just hit the nail on the head. A team is part of the natural growth of what you do with this now, isn't it?
It really is. And one of the things we're discovering, and those are in the audience that are entrepreneurs and growing businesses in whatever sector they'll get this, is we're discovering what our position in the market is, Rich. It's really, there have been times where I have been tempted to guide us into what I'll call the commoditization factor, where we've got the gold, silver, and bronze podcast packages, and we've got gold, silver, and bronze audiobook packages. And the truth is, it's a force feed for us. We're too boutiquey, we're too high touch and white glove. And what I hear from our clients is, this is the experience I'm looking for. In fact, I had a sales call yesterday where somebody said exactly those words. It was about an audiobook. And she said, I've talked to a lot of companies, but I've got a feeling I'm going to have an experience that I'm looking for with you guys. So that's a position we're finding ourselves. Sometimes branding is like a treasure hunt, right? You got to figure out who you are.
So, by the way, for those streaming along live tonight, whatever channels you're on, if you have questions for our guests, drop them in the chat. We will field them. We'll bring you into the action. But let's go back to that phrase you used, David. You said voice branding.
Right.
What is voice branding?
Well, I don't know that I invented this thing, but I do know in the audiobook side of the market, when I entered, it was rare that an author was reading their own book. And I actually started recording authors reading their own on you sitting down on Skype. So this was long before we had, the Riversides of the world, the so-called remote recording platforms like Squadcast and StreamYard, which we use now because they do what's called end-to-end recording. Anyway, so back to the focus, which is the voice brand. When nonfiction authors would approach me, I'm like, why would anyone want to read this book? You need to deliver. You're the connectivity to the market. You're the connectivity to your audience. People recognize you. You might be a podcaster, an NSA speaker, a keynote, what have you. Build a brand around your voice and the way you deliver. And the idea here, and we have a few producers that work with authors when we do this package. It's been wildly successful. We talk about the fact that we're not trying to train an author to be a voiceover talent. What we're trying to do is tease out of them, directing them live in a virtual studio environment, tease out of them a performance that lands with the listener. It's one listener at a time with audiobooks. So it's a very intimate, like the world you've lived in for so long, the radio thing. It's really intimate. It's one listener, one voice to one listener, right? So it's about that intimacy with the microphone, working with the producer to land so that it connects with the listener. And so that's the voice brand. And then from there, it's magic, right?
Well, and that coincides with what I coach and teach people. You are the brand. And authors are a tough breed sometimes, because they want to read the book and talk about the book, but they don't want to elevate them. They don't want to be the brand. So what you're doing is really helping them slow into becoming the brand by doing the book.
What's cool, I love what you just said there, Rich, because sorry to step on you. The thing is, I've said this on webinars and when we're talking about this process, the unintended consequence or benefit to reading your own audiobook as a nonfiction author is that it reconnects you with the material in a new way. It's media training in the purest sense. You're working with a producer to help you orate a clean performance that's recorded on mic. So in addition to getting the product that's now on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes, and wherever else you want to be, about 52 other places you can be with an audiobook, 50 or so, you're also experiencing what it's like to be a performer. And we're dealing with a very broad spectrum of capacity and talent around that. Some authors are really good at this and some need a lot of experience. So what you just pointed to is beautiful. And it does dovetail very nicely with what you're talking about. Of course, out of the other end, you're actually getting a product. So,
well, where do you begin with someone that is a novice? They have no idea. They don't even know what the microphone does for them. How do you work with an author that you're like, okay, we want your authentic voice? Right. And how do you nurture them, give them some practical tips to break the ice and get into it?
Well, some of them do ask it for tips and so forth in sort of the pre-production stage. And Mark Shipman, who runs this side of the business, could probably do a much deeper and more effective dive. He took what I was doing about 5 years ago and put it on steroids and really developed it into a full program. But I can say a few things about it. I mean, the one thing is that you're not really going to know what you're going to get from an author in terms of delivery until you just cut them loose on a microphone and start hearing what they're doing. Because when you're just talking with someone, and this from your media experience, it's very different than reading. Doing an interview like this where we're riffing is very, and pulling ideas from our head is very different than reading a manuscript, particularly if it's their own manuscript. And there's also the mechanics of reading is different for different people. They have different capacity to do that. We've had people that stutter at the beginning of every sentence, for example, or we've had people that have dyslexia. We've actually had cases where the author has said to us, I have dyslexia, we're going to have to hire talent. I can't read. I can talk to you like this, but when I start to read, I'm going to get all screwed up. So it's a case by case thing. But and what we find is they've got to just dive in, get into the read, and Mark or Chip or whoever's producing on our team will say, okay, stop. Go back there. You may want to slow down a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of something with modulation, but it's a delicate balance because for a couple of reasons. One is we don't want to get them overthinking, because then they lose their they lose the connectivity to the content, and they get in their head too much. There's a second reason, and I lost it. It'll come back. But anyway, so most of it's about if you're in your head too much, and it's going to spoil the experience and delivering really a relaxed performance.
Well, and like I know some people are afraid of their own voice. There's the head voice that we hear, and there's the room voice. And the first time, going back to my early days, the first time I heard my audio tape voice or the real room voice was like, please shut that thing off. I'm sure you guys run into that too when they hear that first.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a startle, and the microphones that we're using are actually audio interfaces. And here, I'll show you. So this is one of the microphones we recommend. It's an audio interface, and it's the microphone that we're using, right? So you plug in your headset here, your headphones or headset while you're recording, and you do hear what we call in the studio live cue, right? So you can hear your own voice on mic, and then you can work the mic and proximity to get used to that. But some of the people we've worked with had no experience having heard their own voice, and it is a bit startling to them, and they have to kind of get over that. So
one other area I want to touch on with the books is because I know different companies that you loaded up to that you shared on the Amazons and other places. Some are really particular about it's got to be the word for word of the book. Others give you the freedom to reread it, storytell, or edit. Where do you fall on that?
Oh, that's really a great question. So our experience with ACX, which is kind of the hub of all of those spokes you just mentioned, they're not too critical about the internal of the book, but they are very prickly about matching the title, the credits, about who's narrating, and the title of the credits. It has to exactly match the artwork. Otherwise, they freak out and they'll reject the book. So there is that. But inside, we have had, and this happens, we've got business authors that are very familiar with what they do, and they're trying to loosen it up a little bit so it feels like it's connecting. And so we allow that latitude. And again, it's a talent thing, and some people can riff a little bit. And I did have one extreme case. This is when I was working alone and before I actually started Audivita with a team. Rich, I had a woman who wrote a book that she was an improv teacher and a medical professional. So her gig was teaching teams in medical contexts how to use improvisation to communicate more effectively on behalf of their patients, right? So she went way off the rails. I mean, we got it done. I mean, it was almost like she was reading from an outline. And it's tricky because our producer's there with a PDF, they're reading a PDF, and he's marking for our editor, okay, use take 3 for this line. Okay, we redid this one 16 times. Start here. Make sure you move this here. We're using the session and we're making notes so the editor can go through the audio and can anticipate where the edits are going to be. In the end, we get a stitched performance that's perfect. But sometimes, like if you've got graphics or charts and graphs in an audiobook, you've got to send them to your website, or you can actually upload a PDF with the files that we deliver to the distribution channels. But typically, I like to have them drive it to a website, and so there's a little bit of freedom, to say, for more information about what I just talked about, you can find Figure 3 on my website, blah 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 blah.com/downloads or whatever it is.
So audiobooks are hot. Authors are using them. They're great lead magnets. There's so many different ways to do it. Let's talk about the other hot thing in audio media is, of course, podcasting. It's exploding. We were talking backstage in the green room that if podcasting were alive when I was back at my beginning 30 plus years ago, I would have a whole different career, because podcasting's unlocked so much for authors, leaders, intellectual people. Tell us about what you guys do with audio podcasting.
Well, our core business has been built on the company, the entrepreneur, the speaker, the author that wants to build a platform in digital media. And the podcast is one of those elements. It's a subset of their greater marketing effort. So I like to say they're investing in content marketing. They're putting themselves at the center of the equation too, but conversation. They're using their voice brand to do that. And then they're bringing in peers. They're bringing in colleagues. They're bringing in team members. We have a couple that do that. And so we also like to say, you didn't ask this question, but I'll answer it anyway. People right away, in some cases, they're like, how do I monetize? How do I monetize?
That's a number one question.
Yes, it's a whole different question. I'm sorry, I probably jumped ahead in the interview.
No, but fine, go with it.
I'll just riff. So moving into that for a moment, the answer I like to give to that question is, start with an audience of one. Use it as a prospecting tool. If you're in business and you're using this as a platform to get more business in the door, which is really why you're doing it. With business podcasting, the podcast isn't the product. That's also true of the audiobook side. The business author's they're not staring at unit sales hoping to get an ROI. That's what the novelist is going to do, because it's the end product itself. It's really an entertainment product. But with business podcasting or audiobooks, it's a ticket to bring. It's a lead generator. It's a lead magnet. So it's much easier to make a phone. Pick up the phone, pick up Zoom, and say, hey, you want to be on my show? Few people will refuse that offer because it's publicity for them. And so I love that idea of the audience of one, because now something magical happens when you're in the interview. You create a bond with that person. Many times they become clients, and we have use cases with some of our clients who have said to me, David, this podcasting, I had one guy come on my show. It was the largest consulting gig I've ever had. So it paid for itself many times over. It doesn't
Well,
always happen, but it can happen.
well, that's one of the secrets, David, that I work with people and I let them know. One of the great thing is ask for your guests to be someone that you want to do business with. Intentionally invite someone that you like. I like to work with them. I like to partner with them. I want to get to know their service project and bring them in, make them feel good, give them a great show, wait a week, reach back out and say, I was thinking about what we said on the podcast. Maybe we can do some business together. And people usually respond like, wow, you thought of me after the show, really? But using it as a lead generator to intentionally hook the right guest, not just any old guest, but potential client. Is that what you coach to?
Yeah, we do coach to exactly that. And the other thing, in some cases, we do have shows that are generating, thousands and tens of thousands, or even in one case, a very large show is generating more, tens of millions in a year of streams, which is spectacular to watch. And at that level, you can start to monetize your show with two levels of advertising mechanisms that we can do for those who are on our network. One is called programmatic, which is it works like an ad network where we mark places in the show after it's produced, and we dynamically insert commercials from an ad network partnership that we have, and it facilitates not a high CPM, but it does start to bring money in the door so you can get your show paid for. So now you're starting to create that's some amount of ROI. So production is paid for. I said it. The other is we can bring, when you reach a threshold of roughly about 10,000 average listeners per show or per week, if you like, we can bring you deals where you'll do a host read. There are companies that want to reach your audience if it's large enough. So at that level, then you start to get into a zone where if you want commercials to be a part of the experience for your listener, it's not always a good idea, by the way, but sometimes it is. And there's schools of thought. Some people say, oh, if people hear advertising, it feels like, it's old school. It feels a little like there's cachet with that. Oh, I've got people paying to be on my show to advertise their products. And if it's Walmart or it's AT&T or whoever it is, it feels pretty cool. And it can be kind of like, whoa, okay. But others, it can be distracting. So you have to be selective about how you think about advertising. You can also do affiliate deals, and there's other ways to monetize. I kind of went off the monetization branch of the tree, but that's part of it.
Let's just thank our sponsor here for Rock the Stage Media, the National Speakers Association. Glad to have them sponsoring this, making it possible. We're streaming out larger and larger, doing amazing things with the NSA. So thanks to the NSA for making How to Rock the Stage possible. That's a name drop. That's a simple name read. Drop it in. It can be done so easily. One of the things I also coach is for beginners, just promote their own business as if it's sponsoring, but don't say it's your own company. But that also gets the placement, the timing for future ad inserts.
You're absolutely right.
Right?
Yeah, that's right, Rich. It creates a template so that you can open up space for others, and it gets you used to it as a host to do that, because it can be awkward if you're not used to. You have a lot of years of on-air experience. I've done 200 or 300 interviews myself, so we're a little more comfortable with this stuff. By the way, what you just read there, the other thing is you've got a sponsor that is so related to the work you do. That's what you want. The thing that happens with programmatic is, you can opt out of certain categories, but you're probably going to get some wild, crazy ad that doesn't have a whole lot to do with your company, and you got so that's why you want to be a little selective about that. But audience of one, and then as you grow, now other opportunities can emerge. So
now that's the other thing about audience of one is as you grow, you have to still talk to the audience of one. So keywords like I, you, me, glad to have you here, not y'all here. Do you coach them in that too? People naturally fall into that, don't they?
I am really happy to hear you say this, because even some of the, you watch even the major networks now.
Yes.
They'll address the audience in the collective. It's so unpersonal. I feel like I'm a big cattle call. The most important word in broadcasting, a guy named I. Libson, who coached me years ago, and now I coach my clients this, also a radio consultant, said, the most important word in broadcasting is you. And you know that. And so, but it's not widely known. And even a lot of the professionals on television, I hear them, our audience this and our audience that, and all of you out there in podcast land, it's just so depersonal. Just talk to me, kind of a thing. So.
Well, and in podcasting, when you do make it I and you and I, and I'm glad that
you
here.
Yeah, it's but depending
people are listening in their earbuds, and you're already inside their soul. You're inside their cavity of their body. There's an emotional thing that happens with great when you have
That's
that
right.
one-to-one communication. Even though you're talking to the masses, you make it sound like one-to-one. Your listener is literally going, tell me more, right?
That's right. You're right. That's right. You're activating an emotional response in them because they feel like it's just you and them. You know, if you listen to a broadcaster like Howard Stern, who I think is very skilled at this sort of thing, you feel like he's talking to you. Oprah, you feel like you're talking to one person. She's talking to me. I have a relationship with Oprah. I have a relationship with that podcaster. That's so effective. So I'm really glad you mentioned that because it's not something that's talked about a whole lot.
So audio podcasting, it has exploded. There are studies saying since I'm a lot, the video is beginning to now catch up. Do you think the video TV podcast is going to outrun the audio, or are they both going to meet a nice sweet spot, do you think?
No, it's a little bit of a crystal ball thing. I mean, it's a very dynamic market. We are seeing in our, our on 35 or 40 shows we have in production and new ones coming in, much more of a desire, at least to shoot the video while you're doing the audio interview so that you can use it for verticals in social media and other applications to drive audience. So minimally, we're recording it and parking it somewhere. And then we might bring in one of our team to cut the videos, or our client may have someone on their team that can do that. So we'll ship those raw clips to them. But produced video as well, and doing it like you do it. We have one very successful show called Friends in Fiction. They also stream on Wednesday night. In fact, I think they might be streaming now. And it's 4 ladies. They're Simon & Schuster best-selling authors, and they're novelists, and they talk about their experience of writing. They hang out and they drink wine and they live stream. To multiple formats, very similar to what you're doing. And then like you do, we repackage it for the audio syndication across, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, TuneIn, all of them. And so, I can't remember what we were talking about video and trying to see, where is it's not going to be an either or. I think it's going to be an either and, because remember, what drove podcasting in many ways, I think, is the ability to do other things while you listen. So the same thing that's driving the audiobook market is kind of driving the audio podcast market. And then you've got people that really do want to connect with a screen, and they're perfectly fine being captive to a screen in a way that they don't have to be if they want to listen to the audio version. But if you're doing it both ways like you are, I mean, you're serving both audiences. So fine.
Well, so let's talk about that. Are your audiobook people moving into the podcast space and blurring the lines, co-promoting, co-elevating, or
are they see
not
some of that?
Yet?
Yeah, we have some of that. I mean, it's a function of we'll get an author in, they'll produce the book, they have a good experience with our team, they say, hey, I heard you guys podcast. I've been thinking about doing that because I've got this book. I want to create a podcast branded around the title of my book.
Yes.
Let's do a limited series. Maybe we do a discussion on each chapter, and that becomes a 10-episode podcast discussing my book that I can put on my website, and it'll be out there in the library, the RSS world as well, for consumption at whatever time. So yeah, there's totally cross-pollination. That's the way you said it. I think that's perfect. And it works the other way too. We have some podcasters that are also authors, but usually it's the author that wants to be a podcaster because they're looking, how do I grow my audience? How do I grow my readership? So
when you're doing the audio work, monetization, the number is always the number one question is money, 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 money.
Yeah.
What are
for
some
a lot
of
of
the things
folks
that you're running into that are the podcaster questions that you're getting?
So format, there's so many ways to do this. And, the most basic form of a podcast is like, and I'm not minimizing this in any way, but the most simplistic way is you've got a bookend, call to action, intro. I call them show liners. Show liner on the front, intro and outro. That's show liners. So you create a canned thing, and that's the call to action. It positions the host. We have a voiceover with music come in, and they, just like you did it for this show, beautifully done, by the way. So then inside of that, though, or amongst that, what is the listener experience journey? So one of the things I've been trying to push our team and also our clients to do is think a little bit outside of the box so that there are some surprises. So we might coach them to say, well, pull a quote out and put that before the show starts, and then the music kicks in. So that's a very basic example. A pull quote, that's the first thing you hear. You hear a lot of podcasters doing it. It doesn't come to mind when they're first planning the show.
Right.
Rituals, like I'm always going to ask my guests at the end or a certain point in the show the same 5 questions or 3 questions, because now it's like the grocery store thing. You want to know where the milk is in what aisle, and you get used to that, and it makes you feel comfortable. And now every time you go, if you watch a show like Jeopardy, there are certain rituals in the way that that show is being delivered that you become comfortable with, and you like that. So
I can remember
think,
watching Inside the Actors Guild. Inside the
yep,
Actors Guild would
the
end with
studio,
those
yeah, on
5
Bravo, yeah,
questions,
right,
and that was
with Lipton,
amazing what he got
yep.
out of those 5 questions.
Hmm.
I do want to go back into your history for a second, because
Sure.
I'm curious how that has impacted what you do. Abilene,
Okay.
Discovery Channel, NBC Universal, Disney, Miller Brewing, Embassy Suites. You work with some big dogs.
I
But how did
appreciate
that
that.
transition to where you're at now?
So I started from as a music composer. I was actually I'm born and raised in Chicago. I was a drummer, and then learned how music theory and writing and orchestration and songwriting. I mentored with a guy named Dick Marks, who's he's Richard Marx's dad. So if you know the pop star Richard Marx, that's Richard's
Yeah.
dad. So Richard actually he's a couple of years younger than me. He was actually there around us while we were doing things for Pop Tarts and this and that. And so that was an interesting period. And so Dick was one of the guys that was in the jingle world doing stuff for Leo Burnett and J. Walter Thompson and all the, Foot Cone and Belding and all the big agencies in Chicago. And that's where I learned how to sync music to picture and write music. And at that stage of my life, that was the most important thing to me, was expressing myself through, writing music. So I've gone through a personal transition. But through that, we had studios, and we were doing ADR and looping for some of the studios you mentioned. So we were doing studio and audio services for brands. So I was around advertising a lot. And I got to believe that even though I was a vendor to advertising agencies, working with copywriters, working with brand specialists, the account executives, you start to get a feel for how to communicate brand, how to tell a story with short pieces of film, typically it was 29 and a half seconds, write a song. I did a lot of stuff in children's programming. So again, that was an exercise in simplicity in a world where I have a complex mind, and I tend to probably write too much musically. It was always my challenge was always to do less and say less, more minimalistic. But all of these experiences, like all of us in our professions, I'm sure it's informing me in ways that I'm not even aware of. Even this way I sell, because in the beginning it was just like this. It was me sending my reel around to ad agencies and hoping to get the next Pepsi demo so that I could leg into the business. We built the business in Dallas, Texas, actually. That's where we had our studios. So,
But definitely the companies I just rattled off, they are high level, but again, personal.
right.
I mean, when you think about Disney, they're everywhere,
Yeah.
but there's still a personal vibe that comes out. I have to believe that's somehow glued onto you with what you're doing.
Well, I hope
You
so.
gotta
That's
be part of
very
that
kind of you to say that. I mean, when you think about Walt and the power of Walt, and I study Walt, I've got the book on the
So
shelf.
do I.
Yeah, man. I mean, Walt is like, and he wasn't an easy guy to work with, from what we understand. He had I think he has the same birthday as me, or one day, one way or the other. So he's also a Sagittarius, and he grew up in Chicago. They lived in Chicago, one block over from me, but on the south side. But aside from all those trivial matters, there's just so much to learn from him. I mean, people like Ray Kroc that build businesses. I got to believe that, yeah, it rubbed off how to communicate brand. And with music, it's very abstract. First of all, it's a very hard thing to sell a future piece of music that you have not yet heard. So I'm going into ad agencies with my reel and saying, oh, here are all the commercials I've already done. I have to sell it. I can write the next piece of music they don't even know what the film is yet. So,
Yes.
so it's selling the future, and it's I probably have internalized a lot of these skills, but I think just even as a guy that talks to potential clients all day, I gained some knowledge from selling music because it's so abstract, if that makes any sense.
Oh no, it totally does. Again, anyone in the media that's a creative, there's a point where you have a blank canvas and you have to know how to fill that canvas. And that's where artistry comes in. That's where creatives come in. It's a lot of fun to be there.
And you do this every day with your voice and with your personality. And we were talking offline, your ability to transition. That's such an art form. You watch a skilled interviewer, man, there's nothing like it. And everybody kind of finds their own way into it. Like when I first started doing Small Biz America, which was my own podcast, I was interviewing entrepreneurs. I had no business model. I didn't know why I was doing it. The podcasts weren't big yet, blah, 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 blah. But I was doing it. And it took me a while to sort of find my voice. At first, I was imitating other interviewers that I heard and, crawling into their skin. What would Larry King do? He'd listen and shut up and all of that. and I'm sure you've gone through your own versions of this, right? To be
Oh yeah.
better at this. It's such an art form that you're in. Yeah.
Let's let everyone know how to best find you. And again, you do
Sure.
amazing work, the podcasting, the audio book.
Thank you.
This QR code will take you right to David's website. What are they going to find when they go there, David?
So the website is, like a lot of websites, it's an online active brochure. There's a couple of videos you can watch. You won't get information about pricing because we're very high touch and each project is unique. I mean, we obviously have a range that we work within in the audiobook space. Aside from the work we do with celebrities, which is aside from that, we have a zone that we find, and we'll talk to you about the process and all of that. And then on the podcast side too, we have a template, sort of a general way, but I like to talk to people and get a feel for what they can afford, what their project is about, what their business is about, what their voice brand is. So it's very personalized. So sorry about the long answer to that. So you won't find price. That's what you won't find is pricing, but you will find some other information. You can contact me through the website or DWOLF. So my first initial, last name, Wolf, like the animal, at audavita.com. And Audavita is spelled right there. Our website, unfortunately, it's down today as we're streaming live. I'm sure it's temporary. We should be up tomorrow. So sorry about that, folks, but you can send me an email at DWOLF@audavita.com.
That's fantastic. Again, David, as we land the plane here today, what would be your best advice for either the audio or the podcasting? What would be your best advice for someone listening and tuning in this?
Well, that's a great question. And let me think about it. So we do serve two different kinds of markets. So on the audiobook side, I would say that think of the audiobook as one other version of your manuscript to unlock an audience that doesn't feel like they have time to sit and read. It's just, that's what's happening in the audio side of the audiobook market, in my view. In some cases, it might even help you sell other versions of your book than in print or ebook. Okay, on the podcast side, remember, it is an investment. It's not like it's a one-off thing. I mean, you could certainly do that, but to really get the effect of building a platform, think of the podcast as a part of a broader plan that you have in place, and use it as a prospecting tool to then grow your audience. And then once you've grown your audience, other opportunities will avail themselves, he said.
David Wolf, thanks for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Again, be sure to check out his website, learn more about Audavita, and learn more about what's going on. And if you're a podcaster, want to be a podcaster, a business owner, CEO that wants to learn how to do this, David's the guy with his team that can help you learn how to do it. And it is about building your media brand empire. We talk about that all the time at Rock the Stage here. You are building a media brand empire. The book, the audio book, the podcast, your white papers, so much goes into them. Now you building your brand. Always, if you have questions about that, contact us here at Rock the Stage Media. We will be back next week again, 7 o'clock Eastern time. We go live for How to Rock the Stage. And again, we are so proud to be connected with the National Speakers Association. They help make this show possible each and every week. 4 times a month, we go live for How to Rock the Stage. That's going to do it for tonight. I'm the Trigger, Rich Bontrager. We'll see you back here, 7 o'clock Eastern time. And don't forget, we are now streaming audio podcasts. We'll have the next one in tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. Catch it on all your favorite audio podcast outlets.